Operation New Improv Moves, available now on VHS. Order now and get a free Minetta punching bag with every order. Call now.
The fighting continued this week as we got our second battle between Class 1A and Class 1B, and I'm going to be totally honest with you, dear listener, I am slightly worried that this might end up becoming a big curb stomp thing for Class 1A. Like, it seems to be that the power gulf between the two classes is rather wide, and I'm worried that this is just going to become a thing where Class 1B gets the shit pushed in pretty much every single week. I mean, I had hoped that there would be a little bit more jeopardy into these particular fights themselves, as I said with last week's episode. I'd hoped there'd be a little bit more toing and throwing, and that maybe we'd have a matchup where one Class 1A might lose one week, and then maybe by the time we get up to this, it comes down to one big fight that will determine which class is the best class of all at UA, but we'll soon see. I am worried, like I say, that it is just going to become one big curb stomp thing for Class 1A, as there doesn't seem to be that much of a toing and throwing, a tug of war of power between the two sides. Like, I had hoped that we'd have some matchups where it'd be a little bit harder to tell who was going to actually end up winning it, and you'd have no one who somehow had a magical ability which give them an advantage over someone else whom they should have some kind of weakness against. Like, this week with stuff with Tokoyami coming up with his big flying ability, which he'd shown no examples or no sign of he was going to have that ability before up to this point. Imagine me pulling it out the bag, and it's probably going to think that's going to win the day for them. Like, we understand that Class 1A are the heroes in this show, but come on, a little bit more jeopardy here would be very much appreciated from me. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to make out that I disliked this week's episode, or even that I hated it. I really did enjoy it for what it was worth, even though I still feel as though we're starting to get down into a more difficult angle with this. Again, this is going to be just too much of a curb stamp for Class 1A. And I have to say that I was incredibly apprehensive when we started to get into flashback stuff. As I've said in previous episodes, in this particular story arc, I've been dreading the part when we come up to some kind of flashback or cutaway sequence which would take us out to the fighting. Now, thankfully, it didn't really do that. It was just more of a side thing to explain Tokoyami's new power-up ability. So it didn't really take away anything from the fight, even if it did mess up with the pacing ever so slightly. And it was something that I had hoped there would be a little bit more to it. Like, if we are going to have flashback sequences like this, I feel that they should serve the character and developing their character a lot more than just saying, oh, they've got this magical ability now, so here we go, folks. And if anything, I feel that if anyone should be having flashback sequences, it should be Class 1B. I mean, during this whole story arc thus far, they've pretty much been the bad guys, the antagonists to this whole thing, which, yeah, you do need for stuff like this, but at the same time, My Hero Academia is a television program which can help us make us feel some really great sympathy for our villains, make us understand who they are and what makes them tick, and in some cases, as we saw with the Gentle Criminal stuff about a season ago, make us actually kind of root for them in a way. And what I really want with this story arc is to see a little bit more Class 1B and see what makes them tick. Maybe have a short flashback thing where we get to see what it's like for them living in the shadow of their more successful and more celebrated other half. Like, these characters must have some kind of resentment to Class 1A for given the way they seem to act in these fighting bits. So having that little bit more contextualised and built up would be really appreciated, rather than just having a Flight of Fantasy sequence with us just saying, oh yeah, Tokoyami's got this new ability now, so I guess we're kind of going to win it. Oh, next week we got a little bit of jeopardy, but don't worry, folks, Class 1A are still going to be the top dogs after all is said and done. Like, I don't want to rag on this week's episode and make you feel as though I hated it, because I didn't. I did enjoy it for what it's worth. It just that there seems to be elements of it that just, as I say, kind of felt a little bit disappointing. Like the stuff with the CGI pipe stuff. Last week we had some really fantastic animated bits within it. Animation which itself looked on par with what you'd expect to see in a feature film. This week we get CGI pipes. Like, I'm just staggered by it. Yeah, I know that it would be a lot quicker and a lot easier to render that up than someone taking the time to painstakingly animate it themselves, but even still, it just looks so noticeably off-putting that it is just that, off-putting. It's one of those rare things where you just kind of sit to yourself and think, yeah, Western Animation seems to be able to integrate CGI better into their programs than it seems to the anime stuff is. Though, of course, with that said, not a massive anime person, and I'm sure that in the comment section people will correct me and say, oh, this show integrates it perfectly, or this show does it better than the Western Animation stuff, but still, compared to what we had last week, this week, CGI pipes. Just CGI pipes, really ugly CGI pipes. Of course, to give some balance with this week's episode, to make it actually seem as though I did enjoy it, because ultimately I did, even if there was some aspects of it that I feel were certainly weakening on some of the stuff we've had thus far, I still have to say that I did enjoy the fact that actually this flashback sequence itself was handled a lot more effectively than I thought it was going to do. As soon as I saw the flashback sequence kicking off, I had a bad worry that all of a sudden we'd cut to Tokoyami in the middle of a fight or something. The action picked up almost immediately where it was supposed to do, and the flashback sequence itself was fine. I mean, the whole thing with him and Hawks was something I kind of feel should have been dedicated its own episode or something like that, rather than just be a flashback itself. But given all the action that was happening with last year's season, I don't think you could have easily fit this into it, or rather within the anime, or rather the manga itself. It wouldn't be something that would have just easily fit into it without ruining the narrative flow of it. And what we got, well, it was fine. I don't think it was ultimately as substantial as really it should have been, and in the end it just turned into a, oh, he can fly now. And this would end up being the point where I make a joke about Rise of Skywalker, but Rise of Skywalker is enough of its own joke already. Oh!
Yeah.
Alright, I'll admit that's a very laboured way into getting into that joke, but you know what? It's there now. It's out in the universe. It's a thing. It's probably the worst thing about this week's episode, that I actually made that kind of a bad joke. Again, the episode itself was fine. It was enjoyable. There's nothing about it which is terribly terrible. It did everything that it needed to. It didn't really rise above and beyond the Call of Duty to create something that was truly memorable. But still, what did you think, dear listener? Did you love this week's episode of My Hero Academia? Did you hate it? Did you find it a little bit average? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll get back to you shortly, either directly in the comments themselves or towards the end of next week's video. I'm curious to see where all this is going to be going. Next week looks like it's going to be the wrap up of this fight sequence. Is it going to be a curb stomp for Class 1A? Is it going to be a little bit more difficult for them? Or is Class 1B actually going to get the win here? We'll soon see. Thank you for watching, and now, outro! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!